Alright, I decided to make another video. Today I want to talk about the Peripheral. For those of us that watch Lord of the Rings, there was an ad in the last episode for the Peripheral that pulled you back to the main screen of Amazon Prime. You had to go back in and re-click the last episode of Rings of Power and start over from the beginning. So I wasn't too intent on watching that show. Rings of Power left a bad taste in my mouth. I happened to be bored and just said, okay, let's see what's in it. One of the guys at work that's not into sci-fi, is not into fiction work. He usually only pays attention to nonfiction stuff. Was like, have you seen this show? And I'm like, well, I heard, a couple people said that they couldn't make it through the first episode. And he's like, well, I feel sorry for them. So one night I was bored. I decided to watch it. I liked the first episode. Was intrigued by the world. I went on Rotten Tomatoes. Rotten Tomatoes had a higher audience score than a critic score. That's usually a sign of a good television show or a good movie. Most of us don't pay attention to what critics have to say. Well, I come to YouTube for reviews on stuff and different people's opinions. So I'm not going to cover the first couple of shows that much, other than the main character is Flynn. It revolves around her family for the most part, and her town. And by when I say her town, what you think are small, little, meager characters, by the end of the first season are not. They're major players. I kind of got a Twin Peaks vibe from it, where all these stories were interlaced together. But in the end, it's a sci-fi, time-traveling, dystopian future show.
I've been to London, Burton. Hell, I've visited the future.
I don't think a lot of people can have it on and do stuff around the house and pay attention to it. I think you need to sit down and watch it, and that needs to be your thing. Like you're sitting down watching a movie. I've seen a lot of videos on here with explanations for the series. I haven't watched any of them, because I completely understood what was going on. I think if you pay attention, you'll be fine. It's very mind-boggling. It turns the world upside down several times. You have several villains. You have villains in the current timeline, villains in the future. Some of my favorite characters in the show besides Flynn are Connor and Lowbeer. Lowbeer was interesting, comes in around episode 7.
You do recall I don't like to be interrupted on my daily constitutional, Beatrice.
Yes, Mom.
I assume this is about the recent disturbance at the Research Institute.
Indeed, Mom.
In 10 words or less, please.
And pretty much shuts everybody down. It's kind of cool. I haven't read the book. I know some people were complaining in the Amazon Prime reviews, and it's a 4.5 stars out of 5 on Amazon Prime reviews, but we know how well to trust that after Lord of the Rings and that whole debacle. I don't think this was as a highlight of a show. I don't think they had the reason to do that to make it look more successful than it was. So I'm going to say it's a pretty fair rating of 4.5 out of 5. And it had an 88% critics audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. So at least it was at the time of this recording. But there were a lot of people complaining in the Amazon comments that it's woke, it's this, it's that, a female's better than everybody else. I can see what you're saying, but I didn't get that vibe. Yes, the main character is female. Yes, she's better at Sims than her brother. I mean, I know 5-year-old kids that are better than playing video games than I am, and I'm in my 40s. So it doesn't really matter to me as much. You see her suffer. You see her flaws. You see that she still struggles with a lot of things. She definitely struggles with her family, trying to take care of everything. Her mother's sick at the beginning of it. She's got a brain tumor, can't see. She's the main caretaker of her mother. She has a love interest in her timeline, which she's no longer into, because I think she was taking care of her mother and her brother went to war. Her brother and his group of friends have these things called haptics in them that allows them to like link up and see everything that they see. Like if one's good at communications, and one's a sniper, one's hand-to-hand combat, they can all link up and they can all use that ability. You find out later on that technology was not even available until the RI jumped into their timeline from the future. And they created what they call as a stub. It is an alternate timeline. She is an alternate timeline from the main timeline. The future that she travels to is the ultimate timeline. It kind of gets a little vague, but at the end of it, in the very last episode, they sum it all up nice and tight. They do a better job of keeping their timeline than the Marvel multiverse does. I will give them credit. The book is probably amazing if the show is this good, because you know the book is always 4 times better, at least. I'm not going to cover too much of the beginning of the series because that's a lot of world building. And if you've already watched it and you're just checking out my review, it's going to be old and tiring. It's basic world building. There's some cool stuff, some chromatic camouflage cars. You get to see the haptics at work. And you get the first transition into the future. Into future London. And when you first go in there, you have no idea what's going on. You think it's a sim. And you learn really quickly that it's not really a sim. Main villains, Pickett in her timeline.
Fuck you. And eat shit. All caps.
Like you shouting. Are you gonna be all right in here by yourself?
Oh, yes, sir.
The main villain is Corbell Pickett in her timeline. That he kind of reminds me of the villain from Roadhouse, where he owns everyone in the town. They show a scene where he kills like all the local gangsters, tricks them into getting these armored cars and leaves them out in the hot sun for a couple hours, and they die in the cars. They're locked in, they can't get out. So he has run all the other competition out of town, but he's also run out what I would call the actual criminals, the ones that are out killing and shooting people. The town is very peaceful, big drug operation coming out of it. Corbell Pickett is a pretty sneaky character.
I've got a carrot, and I've got a stick.
I'm curious about the stick.
Next one's in your fucking ear.
And you have Lev and Charisse in the future.
But may I call you Lev?
May I call you Charisse?
I prefer not. You stole something from me.
And I almost want to put Alita in that list too, but we just get to find her. You see her in like episode 2, and then she disappears, and you finally see her again in the last episode of the season.
Beautiful green turf, thousands and thousands of bodies. Dig a hole, love. Your mother's here, and your sisters, and your little brother.
And what she has to say to Wilf is pretty intense.
Want to know who killed our families, Wolf? The Klept. There was contagion in the camps, and they wiped us all out for fear of it. And not just here, all over England. It was a little coordinated effort, 5 million people in under a fortnight.
Lowbeer is in the last couple episodes. Like I said, the show is good. The first 2 or 3 episodes are world building and kind of setting things up. After like episode 4, the world starts to unravel and things start moving very fast. There is some scenes where she just goes into the future and they chit chat and then she goes back home. There is some of that, but I don't think any of it was unneeded. There is like an interracial romance thing that people were complaining about. Like, it was what it was. I'm very picky about politics being shoved into my stuff, and I didn't get offended by it. There's some instances they talk about climate change. Well, it's a dystopian future. I think that's safe to play around in that. Basically, they had this thing called a jackpot. A bunch of animals died, plants died. There was a war, there was this happened, and it all culminated with a nuclear blast by, I guess, right-wing terrorists. It didn't bother me. There is a scene where Flynn gets questioned about it because they're upping the jackpot in her world to try to kill her.
What is it?
They say they're planning to blow up a missile silo. And you know there's that new Air Force silo down towards Spring Creek? Big one?
Because they have not been successful and they send hitmen in. And then you get into Bob the Butcher.
Haven't you, Bob?
Seriously, buddy, you got the wrong number.
Well, I guess I must have Tommy Giorno's number wrong too then. Which is a shame because I was planning on calling him next.
Maybe tell him about your daughter.
In that little bungalow of hers. Baton Rouge, isn't it?
Bob the Butcher, when he comes into that story, turns everything on its head.
Let me just take a quick take a look on the off chance I can one-up Charlie. I got some history with him, which I won't bore you sharing, but sending a little grief his way would make my morning. You don't mind, do you?
I'd actually just as soon wait.
So they can call you on a telephone from the future. It's pretty crazy. And they're hiring all these hitmen to go after Flynn because she has this information in her head. And you find out probably about episode 5 or 6 that it's in her head. And the brother and his veteran friends keep killing him. So they try to enlist Corbell Pickett. There's a whole scene with that, with the carrot and the stick.
I was, I guess, a bit flustered, to be honest.
Shoot him. Shoot him now. Get down!
So they're just going to up the jackpot to kill her. Lowbeer is trying to figure out what's going on. I think she has a good idea. There's something... The people she works for know everything you could possibly even think about. If you're thinking about it, they know it, pretty much.
And you, I presume, are the formidable Flynn Fisher.
There's a team up between Flynn and Lowbeer. It looks like it's going to be pretty interesting going into the next season. Flynn messing with the timeline was pretty ingenious.
But I am aware of how one might do it.
I need you to open a new stub.
It's sad what happens in her original timeline. But like I said, every character in this plays a role. Tommy plays a role. Jasper plays a huge role at the end. We're talking about stuff that changes that world, that little world she lives in that town. It completely upsets the dynamic. The hand-to-hand combat scenes were pretty good. You got to see like the range of emotion in their faces. It wasn't like sword dancing or anything like that. It wasn't super shaky cam where you couldn't tell what was going on.
I got a foothold in your world now. So next time, I'll be going for you instead.
You can tell this is filmed from a completely different approach of Lord of the Rings. I will say, so far, this whole show keeps you on the tip of your toes, keeps you enthralled for more. This is what I look for in my escapism. I want to think about this and only this. And I like things that push my brain around a little bit, that I have to pay attention. Like, you wonder about it when you turn the show off and you got to wait for the next episode. You're like, huh, so what's going to happen next? And that's the stuff I really like. I hope you'll like it too. I give this show a solid 9 out of 10. I'm actually going to go with a 9.5 out of 10. It's not perfect. We'll wait and see. If they carry along the way they're going for the next season, it'll be a 9.5.